Hi everyone and welcome to my Runes and Runeword tier list. As you may know, runes are coming in the Vessel of Hatred expansion and they are very powerful, but not all of them are created equal. We were able to test them on the public test realm for patch 2.0. I've been trying out a lot of these runes, a lot of different builds, and just to understand what is actually going to be a good combo versus not. There has been a lot of feedback given about those runes as well, in particular about certain very overpowered combos that everyone always went for. And there may be, some adjustments, buffs and nerfs to some of these, but I think for now a lot of people will be interested to see what we got. So I created this runes and runeword tier list here, and we have the two groups of runes, the ritual runes and invocation runes. If you have no idea what they do, the way this works is that you have always a combination of one of each of those two rune types. So the ritual rune is one that has a certain condition to give you offering. And then the invocation rune has a certain cost of offering that you can generate with that other ritual rune. And then you get a certain buff, or you get a certain effect, or you cast a certain skill. So here's just one example. You travel 5 meters, then you get 50 offering. And then when you acquire 25 offering, in this case, we gain more at once than this thing costs actually. You get that crit buff. In this case, you would even get 2 crit stacks basically, because we gain 50, it costs 25. And there's other stuff like that, where, for example, you can cast some skills. So one thing that is very prevalent on the PTR was, for example, the Yom rune. This one gives you Petrify from the Druid, including the crit buff, for example. So a lot of builds went for this. This was a very strong one. And there's lots of other stuff, as you can see here. So if you want to check out those runes in more detail, we also have an overview on this here on Maxroll. And I'll also show you, we have the tooltips here, so you can kind of understand what they do. So let's go through them and I'll explain why certain runes are good or bad from my perspective. Before we continue with the video, I want to give a shout out to today's sponsor, Factor 75. Do you like to eat delicious chef-prepared meals at home, but you can't be bothered or you just don't have the time to prepare them yourself? Well, Factor's got you covered. Instead of ordering expensive takeout, you can choose Factor and get ready-to-heat meals delivered to your doorstep. Every week there are over 35 meals to choose from, including keto, calorie smart, vegan, veggie, and more. And in addition, they offer tons of other snack options like breakfast, smoothies, juices, and small bites. Their website is easy to use with all of the information and the menu right at your fingertips, and you can place your order in just seconds. Factor meals are high quality and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. And if you use my link in the description or the QR code on the side, then you can get 50% off your first order and 20% off during the next 4 orders in the first month. So go try it out. Again, a big thank you to Factor 75 for sponsoring this video, and of course to you guys. Every new subscription and order through my link or the QR code helps to support the channel. And now let's go back to the video. All right, let's jump in with the tier list. Let's start with the invocation runes, actually, the effect runes, so to say. So we have a lot of runes here. There's more of them than the ritual runes, because there's also lots of different skills and lots of different effects you can get. But the best ones that we have seen over and over on the PTR were Yom rune for the Petrify, then we had the Om rune for the Warcry plus Berserking, and then we had the Wat rune that gave you Decrepify, including the Execute and the Slow and the damage reduction. So those 3 runes is something that I have been gravitating towards on basically every single build. Yom rune in particular is extremely powerful on the boss. That gives you 50% extra crit damage. So for typical crit builds, this is insane. However, it doesn't work for dots. It doesn't work for minions. So you usually have to go for some alternatives there. Om rune, on the other hand, is extremely good, including on Barbarian, actually. So there were definitely some Barbarian setups that would even run this, because you just don't want to put a Warcry on your bar, you don't have the space for it, and you can still build into the synergies. You can put skill ranks, you can actually benefit from all this kind of stuff without having it on your bar. So this is really nice, and even some barbers would go for this. But yeah, Warcry is a 15% buff at least, and then you have the Berserking buff, that's 25%, you get movement speed. So yeah, overall, very powerful rune here. And this also works for, dot builds and so on. And then we have Wat rune here. So this is kind of like the defensive side. So if you feel like your setup just can't really fit enough defenses, you have a lot of uniques, or you just can't use the Yom rune, for example, because you're not playing a crit build, then Wat rune was also really nice. And in addition to that, there was another combo. I'm gonna scroll up here real quick to the Xor rune. There was this combo here where I use this visual rune where it says evoke and power from another class, which means evoke a skill from another class. And Decrepify was extremely cheap. It only costs 100 offering compared to, for example, the 500 from Petrify or the 500 from Warcry. So this was actually an alternative way of generating offering by using something that generates a little bit of offering, then cast Decrepify. And then Decrepify would trigger your other rune word that had a soul rune. So this was also a very prevalent combo on the PTR. So this is also why it's up here. It's not really an S tier effect, I would say. It's probably more in this range or in this range here. But just because it's so cheap and then can trigger the other class effects, it was actually very widely used. Going into A tier on the Invocation Runes, we have Gar. I really like this one. It just gives you lots of crit chance. It's very easy to trigger. So especially like early game, it's a very nice rune for lots of builds, and it's a magic rune. So it's easy to acquire. So I'm not really sure how the drop rates will be exactly, but I would expect especially legendary runes to not be that easily acquired. And we have a blue rune here, very far up. So I like that one. It's just a nice buff. Then we have the Sec rune that gives you ultimate cooldown reduction. So for some builds this can be really strong because you just need 200 offering to get -4 seconds on your ultimate cooldown. So in some cases this is kind of the key to have like, permanent uptime of a certain effect. Or if you just can't fit enough cooldown reduction in your setup, this can be very helpful. Some ultimates are very impactful. We have the Mod rune here. This is also something that I saw used or used myself a bunch of times. This gives you the Dark Shrouds from the rogues. So Dark Shroud is the damage reduction. And for example, on some rogue builds, similar to like the Warcry stuff I just explained, I actually used the Mod rune because I could just not worry about the Umbrus aspect, for example. I don't have to put Dark Shroud on the bar or something like that. In that case, yeah, you would just use this rune word, you get all the Dark Shrouds, and you would have, another slot for another unique item on your build or something like that. In addition, other classes can also use the Dark Shroud damage tempers, which are actually pretty potent. They have been nerfed a bit, but this is another perk here. Then we have the Vex rune, +3 to all skills. If you can keep this up permanently, this is really nice. In particular for builds that actually have lots of skills that kind of benefit from those ranks. If you have utility skills where extra ranks mean shorter cooldown, plus the free ranks to your main skill, especially if you don't have like, 20 ranks or something on your core skill. If you have like a typical, I don't know, 10 to 12 ranks skill or something like that, +3 is actually pretty noticeable damage buff. And it can also help you with, for example, ultimate cooldown reduction. So pretty nice. I really like the Vex rune. I used this a few times, especially on Twisting Blades rogue, because you also have this double dipping on skill ranks through Poison Imbuement and Twisting Blades, for example. Then we have the B tier. We have Lum rune. I have it relatively far up. I didn't actually use it very much because most late game builds kind of don't really worry about resources these days, but it is a magic rune. It's easy to get, and it kind of just starts solving your resources very easily from the start. So I imagine, especially in the progression, a lot of builds will probably just fit this in before they get their endgame setup online. So I like this a lot. We have the Tech rune. I have this in B tier because it's basically only for barbs in some ways. There are like, some synergies with earthquakes. You can make longer earthquakes and then have like the rumble glyph that gives you extra damage buff, for example. Or you can play a real earthquake build. I have not been experimenting too much with this. Maybe it's a bit optimistic here, but at least for all this earthquake stuff, this seemed to be a relatively strong rune. So this is why it's up here. Then we have Xan. This is a very niche rune, but I actually used it on a very strong build, in my Soul Rift build. I made a video about this the other day, you might have seen this. Your next skill cast is guaranteed crit and overpower. Costs a lot, it costs 700 offering, but if you have a skill that has a very long duration or is in other ways very impactful, or you can do like some combo with it, then this can be actually very powerful. So in the Soul Rift case, for example, Soul Rift has a duration of something like 15 seconds, 20 seconds or so if you want. And then you can trigger those explosions, and every single one that you trigger during that cast that you did with this buff active, you will get crit and overpower. So this was the basis of the entire build. So in that case, I have it far up here, but on the other hand, it remains relatively niche. And then we have a similar case here with the Quax rune, where you can also do like one big hit after generating this offering. You spend all of your resources and get extra damage. I found it also kind of niche, but it has kind of a similar use case as Xang. Maybe you can even combine those two, and then you can get some pretty juicy damage buff. So this is also something to kind of keep an eye out for like certain combos, certain builds. You can actually build around this, especially have like very long lasting effects. Moving to C tier, we have the Cry rune here. This is a Spirit-born Vortex. It's basically a bit like the Cyclone Strike from D3, or like just like a little pull-in animation basically. I didn't find it that good, but it can be useful for some builds. Main problem is the cost. A lot of these utility runes have very high cost. 500 offering, this is the same as a Warcry, for example, or the Petrify. So this is just too costly for what it does. Also has a kind of long cooldown. So yeah, but I just have it here because some builds may really want to pull stuff together and don't have another way of doing so. Then you have the Luck rune. This is a challenging shout. Also very costly, but challenging shout can be a lifesaver. So this is a very powerful defensive buff. I think this is still useful in some cases. We have the Exile rune, kind of similar story. We have the life buff here. It's also way cheaper, has a good uptime. So this is like a nice kind of like extra life buff if you need it, instead of maybe one of the offensive runes. If you feel like you're really squishy, you can throw this one in. Then you have the Save rune. I have it here in C tier. I'm not 100% sure about it. This is a Spirit Wolf that you summon that I think some builds can use. So like Companion Druids, for example. So this is why I have it here. Companion Druid is not really bad. And I think they can use them for like, for example, beefing up their Shepherd's aspect and these kind of things. But outside of that, they are not very useful. Maybe in the very early going, they can help you out a little bit with like just extra chip damage and, you know, whacking away at enemies and stuff. Then you have Aeon rune here. This reduces your cooldowns. I haven't used it myself, but it can be useful. Again, like cooldown reduction can always like be very powerful or potentially break things. So this might actually move up a little bit, just in some cases where we find a build that really wants all the cooldown it can get. This could be the rune for it. Cure rune gives you Open Bulwark, kind of same story as Challenging Shout, very costly, but it's a kind of nice effect when you get it. Then we have a D tier. We're starting with Jar rune, not really befitting of its station from Diablo 2, to be honest, but it's just not really great. So this is something they have actually previewed to us, the Teleport Evade from like the Sorcerer's Enchantment. It sounds kind of cool as a concept, but again, the cost completely kills it. 500 offering just to get a teleport. Yeah, I guess they wanted to be a bit careful here with, you know, not replicating Diablo 2 Sorc teleport, which I think is not bad, but I think 500 is just too much, especially when like stuff like Petrify and Warcry exists. You would just never choose this really voluntarily, unless it's like a maybe Hellfire build. Then we have the Nair rune. This is a concealment rune from Rogue. Yeah, very costly. Stealth is not really useful, but might be a fun thing in PvP, or if for whatever reason you kind of want to sneak around through a dungeon and not actually kill very much or something like that. Then you have the Qua rune. This gives you evade and a movement speed buff. I find it too costly as well for what it does. It is kind of nice effect if it was cheaper, but I think a lot of people actually have trouble even keeping up this 5-second buff so that you can stack up this movement speed. So that's why it's down here. Then you have Ton. This is Meteorites for the Sorc. I haven't really tested a Meteor Sorc, so this is just kind of not a great build these days. But it could be helpful for that build, or it can also be, you know, some kind of like extra chip damage similar to the wolves that I described. So there's a bunch of these runes actually that kind of like just do a little damage. Maybe like when you find them at low level, you're gonna throw them in there. Realistically, I don't really expect this to be used very much, but it also has the added advantage it does fire damage. So for example, for rogues with the new alchemical admixture key passive, this could be interesting because you have an extra element that you can trigger without really having to use an extra skill or some other item or so like that. But other than that, yeah, relatively niche. Same goes for the Tar rune that gives you the Pestilence Swarms from the Spiritborn. Even on a Stinger Pestilence Swarm based build, I didn't actually put this in there. But I mean, I haven't really tested it that much either because we couldn't play Spiritborn. I don't really expect it to be very good though. And we have Sick. This is a concussive stomp from the Spiritborn. It's basically like a frontal cone stun ability. It does have relatively cheap cost for utility skill, but it doesn't really do much more than a CC. And just doing a CC is also not worth a rune slot. We can do literally one temper on one of our items somewhere and get like a, you know, a chance to stun or something. That is probably more consistent and just kind of costs a lot less as an opportunity cost. Then we have F tier. So these are the runes that I really think are not useful for anything. We have Met with the Desecrated Ground. We have Tool with the Frost Nova. You might think, yeah, Frost Nova is kind of cool, but it has the same problem as you just temper it. And Vulnerable is also not really, you know, something that blows you away these days. It's very easy to trigger Vulnerable on any build in the game. Then we have Ono. This is the Dancing Bolts. Kind of same story here, I guess, maybe as the Ton. You have like this very niche effect. It doesn't really seem to do much. And then we have stun. This is the stun grenades for the rogue, and that also seemed terrible. Like again, stunning is easy to do with a temper if you need it. And even for a grenade rogue, this felt useless. So these grenades didn't really do anything. My ranking here right now, we'll see what happens with, you know, some of the changes. I would expect that especially stuff like Petrify and Warcry would get a nerf, maybe with a higher cost to a longer cooldown or something like that. This is at least something that I know a lot of people have been complaining about, that runes just kind of devolved into this just damage buff in the end. And there is a lot of cool potential here for, like, you know, utility skills, like cool effects, and eventually over the seasons, I'm sure we're going to get more runes and make other cool stuff. So I would definitely expect this to change a little bit once we see the final patch notes. And then maybe some of the utility stuff move up a little bit. Maybe some of this stuff goes down a bit. But for now, this is what you got. And then we have the ritual runes. So how do you actually trigger all these invocation runes? Well, you need offering. And there are certainly some really good runes that generate a lot of offering. And you see here that also, if you look at the rarities of the runes, we have a lot of legendary runes up here, and then some rare, and then, you know, some of the magic ones further down. So this is a bit more, you know, according to the rarities, I think, where that whole system kind of makes more sense. And here you see we actually have a lot of like mix and match almost with, you know, different rune qualities that are like really good or really bad. But yeah, talking about the ritual runes, how do you get that offering? So one thing that definitely goes into many builds is the Thumb rune. Whenever you cast a core skill, you get offering. That's 25 offering per cast. There's no cooldown on it. So especially like fast attacking builds, you can get like, you know, 50 offering very easily. 100 offering per second even is pretty realistic for some builds. So this is relatively good. Then you have Live, standing still for 0.3 seconds, in particular for like pushing, boss fights, all this kind of high-end content. This is just an easy activator for many runes. So if you don't really have another way, then yeah, you have to stand still, but it is very accommodating, let's say. So you can stand still literally for 0.3 seconds, you know, I do 1 or 2 swings, and it will already start stacking it up, and then you can do your next step and then stand still again. So it kind of works as long as you're not constantly just moving through the dungeon or something like that. But for speedrunning, of course, not really that great. Then we have a Soul. This is a evoke power from another class. I talked about the combo with the Decrepify, for example. Maybe some other stuff will also become cheaper or more useful. So maybe you can do some other stuff here, like let's say the Concussive Stomp or the Frost Nova or whatever. So depending on what they shift around there. But in particular, with the Decrepify, this was a very good combo and gives you 150 offering. So you actually gain offering out of this combo, basically, because this one costs 100 and this one gives you 150 for your other. So it's like a very easy activator. And then you have the Yule rune, cast a skill for cooldown. So some builds just spam cooldowns like crazy. Let's talk about, you know, Rain of Arrows rogues, Death Trap rogues, Lightning Spear sorks, or even builds that don't have like ridiculous amounts of cooldown. You usually have like, you know, some utility skill, some ability skill, and you kind of just press something like every second or so. And in that case, Yule was also really good choice here. Then we have A tier, where you start with the Sun rune. This is a magic rune that says cast an ultimate skill. So some builds actually cast a lot of ultimate skills. I just mentioned, for example, Death Trap and Rain of Arrows. Both of these builds actually cast an ultimate once, maybe twice per second. So in some cases, this can be an incredible rune where it's just like mega spam. I think it also works for stuff like Iron Maelstrom, for example, on the Barb, where every press actually counts as cast an ultimate skill. And there's also other stuff like Spiritborn will have the Hunt there that they can press very frequently. And here and there's some ultimate skills where this is a really powerful rune. And you have the Epoch rune, where it says spend 5% of your maximum resources, gain 2 offering. So this means if you use your entire resource bar, you get 40. And some builds actually kind of like go up and down all the time, like their entire resource bar. So for example, Bone Spirit builds, something like the Death Trap and the Rain of Arrows build again that I just mentioned. So these are some examples I have in my head. So it definitely kind of just works. And also if you find this early on, before you find some of these legendary runes here, for example, a lot of builds just kind of spam core skills and you spam away your resources really fast, and then you generate resources again. And it's just kind of like gives you a nice flow. So I think this is kind of useful for a bunch of builds. Then you have B tier, starting with Back rune. This one is travel 5 meters, gain 50 offering. 5 meters is probably roughly from the center of the screen to the side of the screen, maybe a bit less. Yeah, you can trigger this relatively easily, especially for speed running, or if you want to, you know, for example, do a combo where you have the Sun rune that I talked about. You wanted to cast your Soul Rift only with this effect active, then you can actually use something like this walk around rune, because you just, look at your bar, you see when it's ready, and then you press your, big skill, similar with the standstill rune here with the live. So these are kind of just easy activators for timing certain effects as well. So it can be kind of nice there. But I did find bug rune to be not as useful as the live rune, at least for high-end stuff. And here we have the seer rune. This is kind of like an alternative to the thumb rune. So here per core skill you get 25. Here per 3 skills you get 25. But it works with non-core skills. So for example, if you spam just basic attacks, something like, puncture rogues, or, sort of various builds that use puncture all the time, this can be nice. It's definitely a good early game choice. So I have it here in B at least. Now here's a seed here. We have knock, inflict a crowd control that isn't slow or chill. You can inflict a lot of crowd controls these days thanks to tempers or fist of fate, for example. So some classes do this more than others. Get 5 offering. You can do something like shared misery even as a combo with this. But the problem is, it doesn't work at all on the boss, so it's relatively useless for anything that matters, let's say. Because, well, pit bosses, dungeon bosses are pretty important. Yeah, kind of the one thing you usually try to optimize your damage around. Then we have Ka, lose 1% of your life, gain 2 offering. I think this is going to be something relatively decent for a bunch of builds in the early game. You don't really want to lose life very much in general, but you can't really avoid it sometimes, and then this could be useful as kind of like a backup option. There's also some low life builds that they're going to have on the Spiritborn, for example, around the Jacinth Shell unique. It's a chest piece that constantly drains your life, and I'm pretty sure this will work together with the Ka rune. And in that case, this could be relatively good for some builds there. But yeah, otherwise, kind of like a, early game thing, I'd say. Then you have Neo. This is a kind of funny one. Deal damage after not taking any in 5 seconds. Resets if invulnerable, gives you 300 offering. That's not terrible. So especially if you don't really have like a good way to use any of those other runes up here, and you, for example, speedrun, or you just generally have like really high dodge chance, or you're like really good at dodging incoming attacks yourself, in boss fights you usually don't really take damage very frequently and so on. So there's certainly some use cases for Neo, but it does not work when you have a barrier and then take a hit. So you have to literally not get hit. This is kind of hard to activate, but relatively powerful when it does. Then I have the Gem rune here, or Sem, cast evade, gain 50 offering. Yeah, it's not a bad amount of offering, but you usually don't want to evade that often on many builds. But there are some builds where you actually evade quite often, like, some rogue builds with the Shroud of Kanduras can come to mind here. Sorks with Teleport Enchant. So a bunch of stuff can definitely make use of this, I'd say, and also otherwise it's just kind of like decent to have in the early game if you're leveling or so. And we have the Yax rune. I have this also in C tier. I haven't actually used it, but the thing is that there is no cooldown on this, and you can spam health potions really fast, and you get 100 offering really quickly. So for example, if there's like a very costly rune that you really want to activate, before a boss fight, let's say we talked about, the Xun rune, or, something like the Petrify, and you just want to make sure that you get this effect at a certain moment, then you walk up into the boss room, you spam your health potion, in 1 second you can activate anything you want. So this is why I think this might see some use. Then we have D tier, and we have Ahu here. This has a lucky hit, 100% chance against injured enemies, gain 10 offering. I actually tried this, and in some builds with high lucky hit, this actually gives you ridiculous amounts of offering. Like if you're pushing the pit and you have like a large pull, the scales with the amount of enemies and so on. So it's kind of nice. But again, the same problem that we had with like some of the others, it doesn't really work on the boss. Yeah, it works at the end of the boss fight, but yeah, it's kind of inconsistent, and you just kind of like lose one of your rune effects through most of the boss fight, and that's maybe not something you want to do. But other than that, especially if, let's say, for some reason you have incredible boss damage, or you do content where bosses don't really exist, then this could be really nice for some builds. Then we have Moni, cast a skill after moving, gain 10 offering, cooldown 0.2 seconds. Yeah, so when you start a step, you can get like a little bit of offering just by that, and other than that, it's like not really that great. Mostly an early game choice here, but it does something, so I have it at least in like not completely useless here. And we have Ur. This is also 10 offering when your minions or companions kill an enemy or die. I mean, dying companions is not really a thing, I believe. For necro minions, yeah, I think skellies can die relatively frequently. Maybe you could even resummon them to get offering. I'm not 100% sure about that. But either way, it's not really great. Again, also doesn't really work on the boss. So yeah. And we have finally F tier for Feo. This is the become injured or crowd controlled. You gain 1000 offering, which is quite a lot. It's actually like the only way to overflow by a large amount as well. So in some cases there could be, a real reason to do this, but it relies on enemies doing something to you. Like, first of all, you have to either, just take a lot of damage and then be nearly dead, and then you can trigger this, or you have to let them crowd control you. A lot of enemies don't even crowd control these days. So this is very situational. Could be good in PvP maybe, but outside of that, I'm not really such a fan of this one here. And that also sums up this rune as a Runewords tier list. So hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think about it. Maybe there are some combos that I just didn't even think about here, or something that I just missed or so. But for now, this is what I got here. Of course, stay tuned for some updates. I'll probably talk about this again when the patch notes are out, when the expansion comes closer. So we'll see what happens then. And I'm sure this is going to be a fun system for everyone to explore with. Of course, some runes work really well in some builds and not so well in other builds. Even when it's like an S tier rune, you may not be able to use it at all because it doesn't work for your build, or you just, can't use a certain ritual rune to generate offering with your combo. So this is just kind of like a general picture here, something like a general popularity list, I would say. So take that with a grain of salt and always think about what actually works for your setup the best. And I'm going to leave you with this. So hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time.